mock everything she held sacred about chess. They'd analyze games they barely understood, criticize moves made by masters far better than themselves, and worst of all, they'd dismiss anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of who deserved to play. The help shouldn't even touch the pieces, she'd overheard a woman saying once. They might not understand how delicate they are. Dolly had bitten her tongue that day, just like every other day. But deep down, a fire burned. She knew more about chess strategy than most people in this room would ever dream of knowing. She'd studied the game religiously, not for trophies or ratings, but because she genuinely loved the pure art of it. Tonight felt different somehow. The air was thick with anticipation as members prepared for their monthly charity exhibition. It was always the same routine. Wealthy donors would gather to watch demonstrations and feel good about their tax-deductible contributions. As Dolly arranged chairs around the main demonstration table, she noticed him strutting across the room like he owned the place. Marcus Cromwell, the club's pride and joy, a genuine Grandmaster who'd moved here 2 years ago and immediately became their celebrity trophy. Marcus was everything Dolly despised about the modern chess world. Arrogant, condescending, and obsessed with his own reputation. She'd watched him humiliate weaker players for sport, making jokes about their moves while an audience of sycophants laughed along. Chess is about intelligence, he'd once declared during a lecture. Some people simply aren't born with the mental capacity to truly understand this game. It's not their fault, really. It's just nature. The way he said it, with that smug smile and those cold eyes, had made Dolly's stomach turn. But she'd kept scrubbing the floor, invisible as always. Tonight, Marcus wore his usual expensive suit, and that insufferable grin that suggested he was about to entertain himself at someone else's expense. Little did he know that his favorite game was about to teach him a lesson in humility that no amount of money could buy. The charity event was in full swing when Marcus decided it was time for his favorite pastime, public humiliation disguised as entertainment. The donors had already contributed generously, wine was flowing freely, and the atmosphere was ripe for what he considered educational demonstration. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his voice cutting through the chatter like a knife. "Tonight I thought we might have a little fun with an impromptu lesson about the levels of chess mastery." The crowd gathered around, their faces lighting up with anticipation. They loved watching Marcus in action, especially when he was about to demonstrate his superiority over some unsuspecting victim. Dolly continued cleaning nearby tables, trying to remain invisible, but something in Marcus's tone made her pause. She'd learned to recognize that particular inflection. It meant someone was about to be humiliated for the crowd's amusement. "You see," Marcus continued, gesturing grandly, "there are natural hierarchies in chess, just as there are in life. Some people are born to be masters. Others—" He let his eyes scan the room theatrically. "Well, others serve different purposes." His gaze landed on Dolly, and that cruel smile spread across his face like oil on water. "You there," he called out, pointing directly at her. "Yes, you, the cleaning lady. What's your name?" Every head in the room turned toward Dolly. She felt their stares like pinpricks on her skin, but she kept her expression neutral. "Dolly, sir." "Dolly. Perfect. Tell me, Dolly, do you know how to play chess?" The question hung in the air like a trap waiting to spring. Dolly could feel the crowd's amusement building. They were already enjoying the setup for whatever humiliation Marcus had planned. "I know the rules, sir," she replied quietly. Marcus clapped his hands together with exaggerated delight. "Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, what do you say we give Dolly here a chance to play against a real Grandmaster? Just for fun, of course." The crowd murmured their approval, some already chuckling at the absurdity of the suggestion. A few whispered comments reached Dolly's ears. This should be quick, and poor thing doesn't know what she's getting into. "Oh, I couldn't, sir," Dolly protested, playing her part perfectly. "I'm working, and I'm sure you have more important—" "Nonsense," Marcus interrupted, clearly relishing the moment. "Consider it part of tonight's entertainment. Besides, it'll be educational for everyone here to see the difference between natural talent and, well, enthusiasm." The crowd laughed at his thinly veiled insult. Marcus gestured toward the ornate demonstration table in the center of the room, its expensive pieces gleaming under the chandelier light. "Come now, don't be shy. I promise I'll go easy on you. We'll make it quick. I wouldn't want to keep you from your duties too long." More laughter rippled through the crowd. Dolly looked around at their expectant faces, at their smug expressions of anticipated entertainment. These people saw her as nothing more than a source of amusement, a way to make themselves feel superior. That familiar fire began to burn in her chest. "All right, sir," she said, setting down her cleaning supplies. "If you insist." The ornate chess set gleamed under the crystal chandelier as Dolly took her seat across from Marcus. The expensive pieces felt cold and heavy in her hands, so different from the worn plastic set where she'd first learned to love this game. But chess was chess, regardless of whether the pieces were carved from ivory or molded from plastic. "Now then," Marcus announced to his captive audience, "let's begin with a simple lesson in opening theory. Dolly, do you know what an opening is?" "When you start the game," she replied simply, her voice betraying none of the knowledge burning beneath the surface. "Exactly." Marcus beamed condescendingly. "Very good. Now, I'll show everyone how a master approaches the opening compared to, well, someone without formal training." He gestured dramatically at the board. "The key to chess mastery lies in understanding principles that take years to develop. Pattern recognition, positional understanding, tactical awareness. These aren't things you can simply pick up by watching." The crowd nodded sagely, as if they themselves possessed such deep understanding. Several members positioned themselves for better views, their phones already out to capture what they assumed would be a quick and amusing demolition. "Ladies first," Marcus said with exaggerated chivalry, indicating that Dolly should play white. Dolly moved her king's pawn 2 squares forward, 1 of 4. A classical choice, but Marcus immediately pounced on the opportunity to lecture. "Ah, yes, the most basic of openings. King's pawn 2 of 4. Very predictable. You see, everyone," he addressed the crowd while moving his own pawn to a 5. "Beginners always start with the most obvious moves. They haven't developed the sophistication to understand the subtleties of modern opening theory." Dolly quietly developed her knight to f3, attacking Marcus's pawn. Standard, solid, unremarkable, exactly what everyone expected from someone of her supposed level. Marcus responded with knight to c6, then launched into another mini-lecture. "Notice how I'm developing with tempo, maintaining central control while preparing for more complex strategic ideas. This is the difference between playing moves and understanding chess." The early moves continued in textbook fashion. Dolly played 3b5, the Roy Lopez opening. It was classical, well-known, the kind of opening any beginner might stumble into by accident. "Oh my," Marcus chuckled, "she's accidentally fallen into the Roy Lopez. How quaint." Of course, knowing the first few moves of an opening is quite different from understanding its deeper strategic concepts. But something nagged at the back of Marcus's mind as the game progressed. Dolly's moves, while appearing simple, were precisely correct. Not just playable, correct. Her pieces developed naturally, her pawn structure remained sound, and she hadn't made a single inaccuracy. Probably just beginner's luck, he told himself. After all, the early moves of most openings were fairly straightforward. The real test would come in the middle game, when tactical complications arose and positional understanding became crucial. "Notice her posture," he whispered conspiratorially to the nearby spectators. "Completely tense. She has no idea what's coming." But if Marcus had looked more carefully, he might have noticed that Dolly's apparent tension wasn't from nervousness, it was from restraint. By move 15, Marcus's condescending commentary had shifted from amused to puzzled. Every single one of Dolly's moves was not just correct. They were the kind of precise, principled decisions that came from deep understanding of positional chess. "Interesting," he murmured, studying the board more carefully than he'd intended. "She's not making the mistakes I expected." The crowd began to sense something different in his tone. Where before he'd been jovial and dismissive, now there was a hint of concentration creeping into his voice. Several spectators leaned forward, trying to understand what was happening on the board. Dolly castled kingside with quiet efficiency. The move was perfectly timed. Not too early, not too late. Her rook swung into the game along the f-file, and suddenly Marcus realized his own king position wasn't as secure as he'd assumed. "That's actually quite good," he admitted reluctantly, then quickly caught himself. Of course, even a broken clock is right twice a day. Beginner's luck can sometimes produce decent moves. But luck doesn't explain 15 consecutive strong moves. Marcus found himself actually thinking now, calculating variations he hadn't expected to need. This was supposed to be a 5-minute demolition job, not a real game. Dolly's next move stopped him cold. She played Kyo 7-D6, and suddenly Marcus saw the trap he'd been walking into. If he took her bishop on G4 as planned, she had Ng5, forking his king and queen. How had she seen that 3 moves ago? Ahem. Marcus cleared his throat, pretending to consider his options while his mind raced. Of course, when you're playing against weaker opposition, you must always be careful not to underestimate tactical possibilities. The crowd was growing restless. They'd expected entertainment, but this was turning into an actual chess match. Several members whispered among themselves, clearly confused by the extended duration of what should have been a quick exhibition. "Is he having trouble?" one woman whispered to her husband. Marcus heard the comment and felt heat rise in his cheeks. This was supposed to be his moment of triumph, his demonstration of natural superiority. Instead, he found himself genuinely struggling against a cleaning lady who shouldn't even know what a fork was. Dolly sat quietly across from him, her expression unchanged. She wasn't gloating or showing off. She was simply playing chess. Good chess. Devastatingly good chess. "She must have been studying," Marcus muttered, more to himself than to the crowd. "Probably been watching games here, picking up bits and pieces." But deep down he was beginning to realize that what he was witnessing wasn't copied knowledge or lucky guessing. This was pure chess understanding, the kind that couldn't be faked or accidentally stumbled upon. When Dolly's next move created a subtle pawn weakness in his position, one so slight that most players wouldn't even notice it, but so permanent that it would haunt the position for the rest of the game, Marcus finally understood. He wasn't playing against a cleaning lady who happened to know chess. He was playing against a master. The room had fallen completely silent. What started as casual entertainment had transformed into something none of them had expected. A genuine chess battle. Marcus stared at the board, beads of sweat forming on his forehead as he realized the full scope of his predicament. Dolly had been methodically outplaying him for the past 10 moves, and now the position was becoming critical. Every piece she'd moved served multiple purposes. Every pawn push created hidden threats. This wasn't luck or copying. This was artistry. She's quite good for someone who just knows the rules. whispered Dr. Patterson, one of the club's strongest players. Marcus looks concerned. Marcus was more than concerned. He was genuinely fighting for his life on the chessboard. The woman across from him had revealed herself to be a player of extraordinary depth, someone who understood chess on a level that rivaled his own. The position reached its crescendo when Dolly lifted her queen. Marcus held his breath, praying she wouldn't see the devastating combination that was lurking in the position. Surely no one could spot something so complex, so deeply hidden. Dolly played QD6 to H2+. The move hit the board with the force of a thunderclap. Marcus's king was suddenly in check, but more than that, he could see the entire combination unfolding before his eyes like a nightmare. If he moved his king to F1, she had Q1+, followed by checkmate. If he blocked with his knight, she would take it and still have mate in 3 moves. "No," he whispered, studying the board desperately. "That's not. She can't have." But she had. The combination was flawless, unstoppable, brilliant. Marcus had walked directly into a mating net so sophisticated that even he hadn't seen it coming until it was too late. The spectators began to understand what was happening. Dr. Patterson's jaw dropped as he traced the forcing sequence. That's actually brilliant," he said in disbelief. "She's found a forced mate." Marcus tried one last desperate defense, moving his king to G1, but Dolly's response was immediate and merciless. Qsh1+ and Kg2 was forced, then Qg1+ drove his king back. When the dust settled, she would capture his queen with check and leave him completely lost. "I resign," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible. The words hung in the air like smoke. No one moved, no one spoke. The great Marcus Cromwell, their prized Grandmaster, their symbol of intellectual superiority, had just been thoroughly defeated by the woman they paid to clean their floors. Dolly reached across the board and offered her hand. "Good game," she said simply. As Marcus shook her hand, his face burning with embarrassment and confusion, one thought kept echoing in his mind. Who was this woman? Where had she learned to play chess like that? And how had he been so completely, utterly wrong about everything? The silence in the room was deafening. Their entire worldview had just been turned upside down by a quiet woman in a simple blouse who understood chess better than any of them ever would. The silence stretched on until finally Dr. Patterson found his voice. "That was extraordinary chess. Where did you learn to play like that?" Dolly stood up slowly, her expression remaining calm despite the magnitude of what had just occurred. "I've always loved the game," she said simply. "My grandmother taught me when I was little." "But that combination," Marcus stammered, still trying to process his defeat. "The way you built..."